To the Livingston Parish Ordinance Committee meeting. Today's Thursday, March the 9th. It's a little after 5. Way after 5. Okay, call to order. Roll call.
Mr. Talbot.
Here.
Mr. Harris.
Here.
Mr. Wascom.
Here.
Mr. Mack.
Here. All right, thanks. Okay, we have 4 ordinance changes to review tonight, and we're going to run through them. 4. We're going to run through them real quick. I think everybody is the committee members have already really reviewed the changes that are being made. Okay. Number 1 on the list, shooting range, location and regulations, introduction of ordinance. Okay. It was a request by the council for the ordinance committee to develop a shooting range ordinance, and we have done so. And we're ready to introduce it to the council tonight. I think all y'all have a copy. Y'all have anything in there that maybe needs to be reviewed? Do you want to run through it real quick? I can. Yeah. This is kind of an informal meeting. If any of y'all would like a copy to look at, and maybe raise your hand, and if you have something to talk about, if something maybe needs to be tweaked. No, but there's some clarification on a couple of sections. Let's just run through it real quick. If y'all want a copy, you can get it. But definitions are pretty much the same. Let's go to 3A. Would you say, Gary?
No, I was just saying, just go through the changes. 3A.
Yeah, page 3A. Well, they're all 3A, huh? My bad.
Yeah, 3A is the whole thing.
Which section?
Section 9-36, y'all. That's where it really starts at. I don't think we got time to read through everything.
No.
Which ones are you going to tweak from what you gave everybody with the pin out?
It was the hours. I think it's, where is the hours written at?
Oh, the next page.
Okay, here it is. Section 9-37E. Access to shooting range, facility and shooting range shall be secured and controlled during those operating hours established in section 9-37C. That should be changed to 9-38C.
Okay.
That's nothing. We didn't change the hours. We just trying to reference it correctly. Everything's here. We took our time. We talked about it often. We did research. We developed it to where you're going to have a permit, and it's going to have to be reviewed by the Plan Commission. The council's going to have to approve it, and then a permit would have to be obtained and maintained. And we have a penalty in here where if the permit, is voided, then certainly a penalty would be assessed.
On 936B, where it says noise mitigation, the parish may implement noise level standards at the property line and nearest occupied dwelling. They give us the right to retroactively implement noise standards if we need to, or if we create a noise ordinance that's enforceable, then they would apply to this?
After the, you can do it during, but after it's established and open and operating business, you can't go back and change the noise ordinance, from what I understand per state law. So,
Okay.
What is your question?
Well, it just says this parish may implement noise level standards at the property line and nearest occupied dwelling.
I think with the
Are
intent
we going
there,
to set them now, or are we going to?
no, the intent there to me, it's just, maybe we need to change the word in there, but basically it says that the parish may implement the noise levels. You follow the parish
Ordinance
noise
that exists
ordinance.
now. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all that, to me, that means.
Sounds good.
Does anybody have any questions? I wanted to add one little thing to the penalty section. But did anybody have a question? I'm sorry.
Come on up.
Who?
You raised your hand.
Oh, yeah, my bad. Come on up. Just introduce yourself.
Tom Myers, I spoke with y'all.
Yeah, I remember you.
I live out the Lucid Creek area. I'm not really concerned as much now about the Lucid Creek area, 'cause I think what it's written there should be okay. I'm concerned about a lot more people, though, other than myself. And let me bring one thing that I kind of wish Mr. Moody was here. I'm going to quote on these.
What section are you in, Mr. Tom?
Pardon me?
What section?
Well, it's under development requirements, 9-37D.
B.
D is in dog.
D is in dog. Okay?
It says distance from occupied dwelling.
That's correct.
And then if you look up the definition of an occupied dwelling,
Uh-huh.
it states that it's a residence. Doesn't say person. In your definitions, the word person is used, and it incorporates such things as businesses, individuals, clubs, things of that nature. But it's not in this section that I just read you. And I don't know if that's going to be an issue or not. One of the things I'm concerned about is if this is the case, and you have something, you have a firing range application. Anything beyond that half mile would meet all the criteria. That includes such things as daycare facilities, parks, schools, churches, anything beyond that half a mile, as long as that applicant meets the requirements of the half mile, it's going to be difficult for y'all to not approve it, even though a lot of people might be in objection to it.
So you tell me we need to work on our definition on what occupied
For one thing,
dwelling
yes,
is.
yes, one thing is that needs to be clarified. Another issue that I have, though, is I don't think in situations where you have churches and you have schools and parks, I mean, this thing is parish-wide. You're only allowing a half-mile leeway between a firing range and these types of structures. These firing ranges are very loud. Weapons nowadays are a lot more high-powered than they were 30 years ago. And they're going to get louder than that later on. Once this ordinance goes into effect, it's going to last a long time. I feel that the way the original ordinance was written, you had a 2-mile leeway between such things as churches and residences. Now, if this ordinance was written in a way that y'all would be able to, I think part of this ordinance is written that way, that if somebody presents something, an application to you, and it's less than the 2 miles, you have the ability to say, okay, I approve of it or disapprove of it. I think we're limiting ourselves when we say half mile. Y'all would be able to make a decision 2 miles and less. And remember, there's very little recourse that those who live beyond the half mile have. I think that might have something to do with why the parish ordinance originally was for 2 miles. It gives those within that boundary a recourse to come and express their opinions and possibly stop the development of these gun ranges. And so my suggestion is primarily that we revisit what the old ordinance said, and maybe as long as y'all have the ability to say yes or no to something less, which is I think already written in there, it's like a variance. Then you have more control, and those within, on the outside of that half mile have more say-so as to what happens.
I see your point. It's Mr. Tom, right? The old ordinance said the council had to approve the gun range if it was within that
Right.
area.
Right.
But it didn't say it couldn't be there. And
No,
to
it
me, it made it to where it was just such a political decision, you know, and it was just so much pressure. You know, we wanted to establish a set of rules and guidelines that would be good for anybody, you know, within Livingston Parish, you know, and if you were thinking about opening this type of business, these were the rules that you had to abide by, and it wasn't, you know, I guess you could say,
Yes, sir.
I mean, it was more fair to all parties.
I
And
understand. Right.
but I do think that may be something that we did overlook and that we need to talk about is my whole thought process was occupied dwelling, residential structures.
You know, we could,
How does the group feel about
we
that?
could change occupied dwellings to say shall mean any residential or commercial or public structure which is legally occupied by one or more persons. So, you know, if it becomes a commercial or a public structure that somebody could occupy at any point in time, that would become an occupied dwelling. So if there was a school, we might have to identify playgrounds also, you know, because there's some of them might not have a structure.
What if we did this? Man, it's just a suggestion. What if we go in here and we write into this ordinance, you know,
You can add.
no
persons to
shooting
it.
range facilities within 2 miles of any public school, you know, any church, any daycare, you know,
Any park, anything.
any park. And then,
Might as well just say no shooting ranges in Livingston Parish.
The deal is.
well, I don't know. I mean,
Would you be okay with that?
No, I wouldn't. I believe in shooting ranges.
Hey,
I mean,
Absolutely.
you could
I
be
think
2
they're a
miles.
good
You
thing.
could be 2 miles away from a daycare and still open one up and be half a mile from a residential occupied structure. I think there's places in Livingston Parish you could have that. You? I mean, I don't know. We'll think about that some more.
You know, we can solve the problem.
How can we
If
fix
we
it,
change the definition of occupied dwelling, say shall mean any residential, public, or commercial structure which is legally occupied by one or more.
Yeah, all you really got to do is add.
And then when we got down to 9-37D, we could go all shooting stations, targets, and firing range shall be located at least 1/2 mile from any existing occupied dwelling or public park. We've already covered schools and everything in the structures, and all we really need to identify is a public park. We got to identify a public park, and that ought to take care of it. Now, I mean, it doesn't satisfy us
I guess
complaint
my
about the
point-
distance,
Right.
but it satisfies the complaints that we're only identifying residents.
Right.
And we're not gonna, school's not gonna become part of that, churches aren't gonna be part of that.
Right.
The library's not gonna be part of that. So by changing the definition of occupied dwellings, we could bring all structures into account that people go into,
Residential, commercial.
commercial or public. And then we can address the playground situation by calling it a public park. You know, if you're within 1/2 mile of an occupied dwelling, which we changed the definition of to include any building that people can go into, and then identify public park with it, then we've covered all the situations. Now, we're not gonna satisfy his distance requirement, but we're gonna address the loophole that would allow, the only thing we would look at would be housing.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Man, I'm glad you came and
Okay. By the
stepped
way,
up and brought that to our
commend you
attention.
guys. I know there's a lot of work went into this. This thing is very well written. Y'all done an excellent job.
Yeah.
It does do a lot to protect us. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandy, were we able to capture that?
Want to change?
On occupied
The
dwelling,
definition of occupied dwelling.
just put a comma behind residential, then put public or commercial structure.
Yeah.
On the definition in 934 of occupied dwelling?
Don't want to include the word park?
No, because we're gonna go to the actual section 9-37, go down to D, and behind occupied dwelling, put or public park. And then that'll cover any park or playground. And then occupied dwelling will have expanded the definition enough to to cover any building, which would be a church or school or whatever.
And
Commercial
Mr. Preston,
structure.
this ain't gonna affect you when, you ain't gotta get a permit to go shoot squirrels in your backyard. I'm just saying. You can still do what you're doing, okay? Just saying.
So I'd like to make a motion to amend it to the, what we just talked about. Is there,
Is there a second?
No, second.
Call for the vote?
Mr. Talbot?
yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes. And then there was one other section, y'all, and let's just talk about it and see if you think a change needs to be made. I think we do. It's the penalty section, as soon as I find it. Action. Site
9-40C.
penalty. Yeah. Shall be fined $500
A
a
day.
day up to the maximum penalty allowed by law.
Which is
I
what?
want to make a motion to change that.
Up to the maximum.
What do you wanna change?
Who wants to add?
I
up
want
to
to
the
add
maximum
those
penalty?
words.
Oh, to the maximum by law. Yeah,
Yeah.
I second
To the
that.
maximum.
I can't make the motion.
Well, then I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'd like, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Nope.
I'd like to make a motion that we send a favorable recommendation with the amendments to the full council for ratification.
I second
second.
that.
Before we call for the vote, is there anybody else that wants to say anything about this ordinance real quick? Because we got 2 or 3 more to go over and we got 30 minutes. Great. Thank y'all. Call for the vote, Sandy. Well, I call for the vote. How about that?
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes. Okay, got through that. Let's go over the next one. Burial plot regulations, introduction of ordinance. Okay. It was a request from the Department of Homeland Security for Livingston Parish for us to write a ordinance with a few rules around burials. Okay?
This one's different from.
So
What's different?
we did a little research
Horses line out.
and let me give you a little bit of history real quick about why this was needed. You know, the floods of 2016 covered a lot of Livingston Parish, and for a long periods of time, and the waters began to saturate the ground where the cemeteries are located, and the water began to get into the ground vaults, and the caskets began to float, pop the lid of the ground vault off, and the caskets began to float and get, relocated, displaced all around the cemeteries and whatnot. And we're still dealing with it 7 months after the flood, trying to relocate the, human remains and caskets back to their original burial place. And so we wanted to try to improve that process in case this ever happens again in the future. So we did a little research and we found out that there's a state law out there that requires funeral establishments to have a tag either, attached to the casket or in a tube on the casket, okay? And that label, that tag, requires the name of the deceased contained within the casket, the date of the deceased within the casket, and the name of the funeral establishment. But what we wanted to also add to that was we wanted to add the cemetery name and location. And we wanted to add the burial plot location. Now, let me go back and say and make sure it's clear, and we'll probably have to go over this again during the council meeting, but this is an ordinance regulating the funeral establishments, the funeral directors that operate within Livingston Parish. Okay? So that was the change in state law. We added those two other requirements, or if this passes. And then through observation of the volunteers and observation of the parties involved in challenge with the task to get our loved ones buried back where they were originally located, we noticed that the real problem was that the ground vaults were being laid at ground elevation or even above ground. And we found out that they're not fastened or secured, and that it made it easy for the ultraviolet rays and the sun to dry out the tire seal. It seals the lid of the vault and allow the water to penetrate and pop the top off and allow that to float. We noticed through observations that those that were buried below ground surface, that was not a problem. So basically, we wanted to establish a law to do away with the ground vaults being allowed at ground elevation, or above ground, And it's to the best of my knowledge, the way this ordinance is written, that you can still, put your loved one in a mausoleum, that effect, because we didn't really have that type of trouble. But after this law goes into effect in Livingston Parish, you wouldn't be able to be in a ground vault at ground elevation. So, the original ordinance that was emailed and those that reviewed it, there's a minor change that we felt that was needed, and that's why you have this extra paperwork here. But keep in mind, people also, if you have a question, you can raise your hand, but keep in mind that tonight this ordinance will be, sent for a public hearing. It'll be introduced tonight and sent for a public hearing at the next meeting, and it won't actually become into law until at the next meeting, if it passes. Okay, so over the next week or so, if you got something that wants to be addressed, you got a question, you can feel free to contact one of us or contact Sandy and bring up your thoughts. But basically, we wanted to add two definitions to the current ordinance, and one of them is burial. And burial means the placement of human remains in a grave. And then interment means the disposition of human remains by interment, scattering, entombment, or burial in a place used or intended to be used and dedicated for cemetery purposes. And the change from the original ordinance to the wording change that we wanted to add tonight is when final disposition of a human body entails interment, and where a burial takes place within a cemetery within Livingston Parish, Louisiana. That section there was added. The top of the uppermost part of the burial vault or other encasement shall be a minimum of 24 inches below the ground surface. In addition to that, we want to, Sandy, I see where you got scratched out.
That's because that's old.
Yeah, I know, but it says Livingston Parish Office of Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness is tasked with the responsibility of enforcing the ordinance listed above. That's going to stay.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Penalties that shall be assessed for violation of this ordinance, let's see. that can all go away, just like you got it. Any violation of this ordinance is subject to a fine of $500 per case, per offense.
So it's not day, it's per offense.
That's right.
That'd be kind of hard to do a day.
And
We'll scratch out penalty per day.
that's right. It's per case,
Because then the next part isn't even needed, is it?
up to the maximum allowed by law.
Well, yeah, but if it's a case and every case is separate, you know, $500 a case, that's the most it can be.
That's right.
Right.
You're right. Okay, then you don't have to put that.
After the
second
case,
part.
and the rest of it can be
That's right.
scratched out.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Sandy, you got those changes?
I'll make a
motion.
motion, we send that favorable recommendation to the parish council meeting tonight.
Thank you.
I second it. It's
Oh,
not,
hold on, I'm sorry. There's one gentleman had something he wanted to say.
Oh, come on up. Come on up and introduce yourself and speak really loud.
R.B. Goings. I'm a independent consultant. I've actually been working with the Louisiana Department of Health on all your cemetery issues for the last 6
Oh,
months.
great.
Yeah. And the one thing I would perhaps suggest, and you did kind of address it below the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, let me find out where you're at.
Okay, right under the identification
Yeah.
of casket.
Yeah.
Funeral establishment operating in Livingston Parish. It needs
Uh-huh.
to be any funeral establishment bearing in Livingston Parish. Because Ravenhorse comes over to Livingston Parish all the time.
Oh,
Somebody
thanks for
can come out
coming.
of any other parish, so it has to do with the burial in the parish, not the funeral home. Now, right below that, you do say when final disposition of a body, so you kind of addressed it there, but
Clarify.
maybe I'm being too picky, but just to be
Yeah, make it
perfectly clear, if you're gonna bury in Livingston Parish, no matter where the funeral home's from, you need to affix this label.
Okay, I agree with you. So back up and start all over and go slow and let us capture this change.
Okay, so rather than saying funeral establishments operating in Livingston Parish, it just needs to say any funeral establishment burying in Livingston Parish. That's gonna perform a burial in Livingston Parish, then the rest can stay. It needs to affix this permanent label. And can I ask you this, because
Oh, hold on, let's
Okay.
do it.
you've been dealing with it
Okay,
for
go
6
ahead.
months, it's boiled up.
Go ahead.
This is something we're gonna address on the state level once
Uh-huh.
all of this is over, but
Uh-huh.
and maybe even want to wait until the state addresses, but this permanent type material, that's just so vague, and I can tell you, I am a funeral director as well, I've seen everything from really good tags
To
to,
paper
remember
inside
when
a
you used to go to the
Ziploc.
hospital and they would handwrite an arm tag for you in the ER? I've seen those affix the caskets. They didn't last until the last shovel of dirt was put on top of the casket. Now, I know the state's going to look at it, so if you guys just kind of want to wait and see what they do, but we
Yeah.
need to toughen that because otherwise you could take a Sharpie and write on the casket and call it yourself,
Call that a-
labeling the casket. So there needs to be a little more teeth to this thing, or it's just a waste of time. It's not a criticism, it's just the way it is. I've been dealing with we've had over 800 disinterments in this great flood, not just Livingston Parish, but statewide.
What is your what do you recommend? As
I don't know, John. We've not looked into it yet. We've been so busy trying to get this done. That's our next step on the state level. I'm working with the Attorney General's office, and that's our next step. So, again, I'm not saying drag this out, but if you guys kind of want to wait and let's see what we can figure out, then you can just piggyback on that.
I don't want to wait.
we
Well,
can just do this.
could you
we can
amend the
it
ordinance?
later on.
Could you amend it?
We can amend it. We certainly can amend it. We can change any ordinance anytime we want.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Hey,
Mr. Harold Banks.
That verbiage there, that wordage there was directly out of the,
It's out of the state,
State.
yeah, and that's why the state needs to change it, and we're working on it. And I'm not saying not do it, you're right, maybe go ahead and do it, and you can amend anything you want, but it just needs to have more to it, or we're gonna be right back where we are with nothing,
Well,
really.
it's,
Right.
it's obviously a bad
I
problem.
really appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
I mean, yeah, just when you've dealt with it for so long.
Right.
It seemed like I had one other question. The $500, you fixed that already, because I was
Yeah.
wondering what per day
Yeah.
meant, how you were gonna.
Yeah.
When would it end, And
Mark,
who's
you
gonna
got something to
enforce
say?
that? Who's gonna enforce that?
Who's going to enforce
who's
it?
gonna
Mark-
oh,
The Livingston Parish Office of Homeland
Mark's
Security.
Mark's gonna enforce it, okay.
Yep.
Did you have something to say?
Did you have something to
I
say?
was just gonna counter a few things, but as long as we pass it, we can amend it later.
Yeah, and that's it.
That's the way it is.
Yeah, I don't want to not want to pass it, yeah,
Right.
not at all. Just gonna ask you something.
So we made a motion.
I have a
Oh, you
motion.
you got another question?
Wait a minute. Oh, and again, this is just food for thought, not that we don't want to pass this, we can amend it. Right now, all the responsibility is placed upon the funeral home. If we ever thought about putting some responsibility on the cemetery? The state doesn't, but I can tell you we're looking at that, because right now, it's all on the funeral home. Now, I could argue both ways, because you take some of these little church cemeteries, they don't have a full-time sexton out there to be there to ensure. So it might place a hardship on them. So maybe it's not a good idea. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm saying we should discuss it and think about it.
Yeah.
You know, as where Denham Memorial is going to have somebody always at the grave site, you go to blah, blah Baptist Church Cemetery, they're not going to have a sexton.
Yeah, I mean, the only person on those things that you can fall back on is gonna be the cemetery that performed the deal.
Funeral home, you mean.
The funeral home. And that may be all we can do.
Yeah.
So, but, all right, well, I just think the biggest change is let's make sure anybody who's going to come into our parish and bury has to play by the
That's a
same
good
rules.
idea, Mr. West. Thanks for bringing
Okay,
that up.
thank you.
Appreciate you.
Motion.
We got the motion. We got the second. Call for the vote.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes. Okay, two other changes. These are to go really quick. One is the change to ordinance 13-55 servitudes.
Did we cross these ordinances?
Where are they at? What?
So the parking was part of the servitude?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought the building line was part of the parking.
Sandy was right. It was three ordinances before. what I consider four
What is
changes.
1356, Sandy?
That's what I asked Shane.
Is
about.
1356G?
I think all these changes are in 1355.
You know, it talks about setback lines.
Yeah, that's
No,
building.
we're not, I don't know why that, okay,
That's what I was asking.
Right.
What
okay,
you
I
wanted
got
to
you.
do.
I thought 1356 was the building, was the parking, mandatory parking. Did you say mandatory parking was in 1355?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no change to 1356. Okay, the other couple of changes to section 1355, servitudes and right-of-ways. This was another request of the public. We've been having a lot of trouble with fences being on servitudes, preventing utility drainage companies, utility companies, different individuals being able to use the servitudes for their intended purpose due to fences and structures being on the servitudes. So we're going to recommend a change tonight to basically say, put in a rule that says no permanent structures such as fences, portable buildings, sheds, whatnot can be constructed or placed within servitudes or right-of-ways within Livingston Parish.
You're gonna talk about the revocation of the other.
And the other change to section 13-55 being introduced is, and we've talked about this a lot, it's the extra parking required for the single-family dwellings with lot sizes of 10,000 square feet or less, multifamily developments consisting of combined total of 20 lots or more, not yet submitted, must include one guest parking space for every 3 single-family lots or multifamily units. We felt like that those extra parking places in those developments weren't being utilized for their intended purpose. A lot of people park broke down vehicles, campers, boats, stuff like that in there. People kind of were hanging out in them. And we felt like most people, when they go to visit somebody in one of these types of subdivisions, are going to park right there at the house and walk straight to there. So we felt like that it needed to be taken out of the ordinance. So we're recommending those two changes to 13-55, and I guess we'll talk about it later tonight in the ordinance meeting. We really need to do what we can to close this meeting and prepare for the council meeting that's going to start at 6 o'clock. However, if somebody's really got something that needs to be addressed about those two topics, they're welcome to raise their hand, come up to the front, and quickly run through what they need to talk about. Nobody? Great.
I'll make a recommendation that we give a favorable report to the council tonight.
Second.
Got a second? Got a motion? Got a second? Call for the vote.
Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Waskom?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes. All right, got a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I'll offer that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bubba. Got a second?
Yes. Second.
Call for the vote.
Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Waskom?